Hey folks, so I'd like to do a couple of examples for you in section 4.3. So go down then to number 14, and I'd like to do number 14 and number 18. A couple things before I get started on number 14. Make sure that you follow the little hints I have here, the starred statement that says you want to make sure that you always go back and check your answers. Some of them might have to be thrown out. The directions on this is that we're going to be finding all solutions by hand, no calculators. I don't care if you use calculators for add, subtract, multiply, divide. I just don't want you to graph. So the very first thing in my tip list is that I should go get a CD, or a common denominator. Before I can get a common denominator on number 14, I need to make sure that all of my denominators are factored as fully as they can be factored. So when I look at that very first denominator, I notice it can be factored. It's a difference of two perfect squares, so I can factor it to 2x minus 1, 2x plus 1. So the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go find my common denominator. And the trick on this is start with your very first denominator and use all of that one, So I'm going to go over here to the right and I'm going to write down all of my first denominator. Then what you want to do is go to your second denominator and you want to ask yourself, do I have any repeat factors? So when I look at my denominator, my current common denominator, I've already used 2x plus 1, so that's a repeat denominator. I don't need to use it again. When I go to my next denominator and I ask myself, do I have a repeat factor here? I compare it to my common denominator. I'm already using 2x minus 1, so that's also a repeat. So what I have here then is my common denominator. So that's number one. First of all, get your common denominator. Number two, multiply every single term by the common denominator. So what I'm going to do is put a set of brackets around my equation. And I want to take every single term in my equation and I want to multiply it by the common denominator. Remember, I'm only multiplying on top because the bottom is actually just an over 1. So I'm going to take my common denominator, pass it out to my first term. When I do this, there's my common denominator, passing it out to my first term. Normally I don't write all of this down, but I am going to for the first question. Take that same common denominator, pass it to the second term. So there's my common denominator, pass to the second term. And then thirdly, I want to take my common denominator and pass it to the third term. So there's my common denominator, and there I've passed it to my third term. Hopefully you're starting to see that there are some things on the numerator that can cancel with factors in the denominator. So let's take a look at the very first term that we have here. I can cancel the 2x minus 1s, one on top, one on bottom, and the 2x plus 1s. On the second term, this one right here, the 2x plus 1 can be canceled. And then on the third term, this one right here, the 2x minus 1 can be canceled. So then when I look at everything that's left over, the first thing that I have for my first term, the only thing that's left over is my 8x. The second thing that I have is a 2x minus 1 times a 3. And I'll go ahead and distribute that out. And then for the third term, I have a 2x plus 1 times a 3. Let's go ahead then and clean that up a bit. My first term becomes my 8x. After I do my distribution, my second term becomes 6x minus 3. And my third term after distribution becomes 6x plus 3. And then I can take that, all I have to do is combine like terms to solve my equation. So when I combine my like terms, I get 8x equals 12x. Let's subtract 8x on both sides. That will give me 0 equals 4x, and then I can divide on both sides by 4, which will give me an x value of 4. Now, take a look at your tip list. We did steps 1, 2, and 3. Step number 4 is to check your answer, and this goes back to that starred statement. Make sure you check that your answers don't cause a 0 in the original denominator. So when you look at your answer of x equals 0, and you plug it into your first denominator, it does not make the denominator 0. It's so far a good solution. Plug it into this denominator, does not make the bottom 0, and plug it into the last denominator, does not make the bottom 0. So this is a good solution. I'm allowed to keep this one. It doesn't cause any problems. Now for number 18, I've already started the question for you. I've already found the common denominator, and I'm getting ready to take my common denominator and distribute it to all the terms in my equation. So when I take my x squared and pass it out to the 1, it becomes x squared times 1. Pass it out to the second term, pass it out to the third term, and pass it out to the fourth term. Now let's go back and take a look and see if there's anything that will cancel. My first term doesn't have anything at all that will cancel. But my second term, this one right here, I have one x on top and the x on bottom that will cancel. For the third term, both x's on top and both x's on bottom will cancel. Nothing else will cancel, so let's clean that up. X squared times 1 is just simply x squared. Then I have a minus 3x, excuse me. And then all of my x's canceled in the next term, so I'm left with a negative 10. And then anything times 0 is 0, so this is equal to 0. And I have a quadratic. Now you and I both know that we have 4 methods of solving quadratics. So choose one of your favorite methods. You know my personal favorite is factoring. So I'm going to factor here. And so I'm going to take a look, and I'm going to use a 5 and a 2 for that 10. I need a negative on the 5 and I need a positive on the 2. So then that leaves me with an x is equal to 5 for a solution and an x is equal to negative 2 for a solution. Don't stop here. Make sure you go back, check both of your answers, plug them into the original equation to make sure they don't cause any problems on bottom. When you look at those denominators, if I plug in a 5 or if I plug in a negative 2, nothing causes 0 on bottom, so I'm allowed then to keep both of my solutions. They're both good solutions.